Hey everyone, it's Steve from Network Advisor. Welcome back to my channel. In this video segment, what I want to talk to you about is two things. One is zyxel's secure Wi-Fi solution, and then that solution got me thinking about something that I believe you should be thinking about, which is the security of remote workers. So let me first explain the problem, and then I'll also explain what it is that zyxel has that can help solve that problem. I don't think that they're the only ones that have come up with this. I suspect other companies have got their own version of this, but it's the only one that I'm aware of at the time. So here I am, I've got my computer hooked up, and I'm in my commercial office. So most of you who've watched my videos know I've got a home office and I've got an office in a commercial building. Well, in this environment, I'm connected to the Flex 100, which is a firewall appliance. And so all the traffic that's leaving my laptop or coming into my laptop is coming through that Flex. So I've got my firewall in place. So as an IT administrator, I can do a pretty good job of controlling at least the ISP type traffic for threats, right? And the minute I take this laptop to a remote location, let's say home, well, now I'm on my home network. It's true, IT can still do some things to try to protect the corporate data or the corporate machine, but in my home network, assuming I wasn't an IT person, you really don't know much about that environment. In fact, you pretty much have to assume that it's a hostile environment. For instance, I could have Internet of Thing type devices on my home network that could be exposed. Remember the big webcam breach that we had, 5-6 years ago, where all the, well, maybe not quite that long ago, where all those webcams got hijacked and used for DDoS attacks. So, I've got these things on my network that you have no idea about. So when I take this corporate machine and I connect it to my home SSID, I'm immediately amongst a bunch of peers of devices that you don't know anything about. And those things can be compromised and therefore could be attacking my machine, sniffing the data, okay? Well, that brings me to what I want to talk about, which is the secure Wi-Fi. So imagine that you could take an access point and that you could use it as literally like a VPN extension of the corporate firewall. So I would take this access point, I would register it to the Flex 100, so now it's part of the Nebula zyxel environment. And then when I send this home with the employee to plug into their router and use in their home office, I'm creating like a Wi-Fi bubble. And what I like about it too is that it enforces two-factor authentication. So the only way that I can connect anything to this is with two-factor authentication. So now I'm immediately locking out other potential wireless type devices in that home environment that might be trying to hop on that SSID. You could almost visualize it in your head as kind of like a Wi-Fi bubble for just the corporate machine, or whatever machines you allow the employee to put on there, because there could be more to it. There could be maybe a printer, or maybe there's a smartphone that the employee uses. But my point is that you're almost literally extending the VP, almost like you're taking a wire, plugging it into the switch at the corporate environment, plugging the end of the wire into the access point, and sending the access point, however many hundreds of miles away to the employee's home. So anyway, what I want to do is show you what that looks like in the Nebula and kind of what I had to do to set it up a little bit, and then I'll show you what it's like to use it, because it's not terribly complicated. Basically, it's the typical Wi-Fi type challenge, except it just asks for two-factor authentication.
All right, first let me start by showing you how I set this up. So I'm going to use the zyxel Nebula web portal. It's a network management portal. So click on here, get logged in. Okay, so this is the web portal that I use to manage my zyxel lab. And I'm going to just show you kind of in some broad strokes how I set up the secure Wi-Fi. The point is that other vendors probably do something similar, so the concepts are probably the same. The individual minutia is not really relevant at this point. So what I did was, in the access point, I had to define an SSID, and then I had to designate that SSID with two-factor authentication capability and by authenticating through the cloud. What that means is that in order for a person to sign in to the Wi-Fi SSID, they have to authenticate with a cloud-based set of credentials, which are defined in here. I'll show you in a second. And then also there's this two-factor authentication. Now, it's worth mentioning here that right here where it says model list, this is a good time to point out that not every single access point that comes from zyxel supports the two-factor authentication. So do your homework before you dive right in if you want to go this route with zyxel. All right, so then after I defined that, then the other thing I had to do was I had to define the the access point itself as a designated remote access point. So in here, I've got my inventory of access points. This one right here, which I've set up as a remote access point, there's just some software settings where you designate it as a remote access point. And then this is kind of the secret sauce right here. So you see how the SSID this is the one earlier where I was setting up the authenticate through Nebula and also the two-factor authentication. Well, this is the VPN SSID. So this is the one that the user will take the access point home, plug it in, and then once they authenticate to the access point on that SSID, that will be essentially their VPN tunnel into the corporate firewall or the Flex. Now also, I guess I should say optionally, you can define a local SSID. So if you just wanted to let there be an alternate SSID for the employee or staffer to use for not going through the VPN, it would just be like local internet. Almost. I wanted to say split tunnel, but it's not really split tunnel. It's just an alternate path. Instead of using the VPN, it would just be using the local internet connection they have at their home. And then the last thing I had to do was in the organization, I had to set up the user. So let's see, where was that? On cloud authentication, I had to define myself as a user so that I could authenticate when that part comes up. And I'll show you that in a minute when we actually demo connecting to it. Okay, so obviously I'm home now. I've got the access point that I'm going to use as my secure Wi-Fi. So this is the one we set up in Nebula. Now it's time for me to plug it in my home office, and let me show you how I authenticate to it. All right, here we are. Let's get this plugged in, grab my Ethernet cord, plug it in. What? Don't most home offices have an Ethernet drop in them? Okay, right, you got me there. So believe it or not, my home office doesn't have one either. Now there's a quick, easy way to solve this problem. One is you could put the unit near the router and plug it in directly. If the dwelling is not too big, the SSID will radiate into the office, and if there's a decent enough signal, that should work by itself. On the other hand, a quick way to solve the problem of not having Ethernet run between the router and the home office location is to use something called power line adapters. I'll leave a link for you in the corner. I've actually done 2 videos on power line adapters, and I've been using them for years, and I'm going to be candid with you. That's what I'm using right now. I run this whole rig, you see, probably, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 different endpoints in this office, all just run off of a power line adapter connector that goes back to my router. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get hooked up. Now, of course, the other thing too is that this is PoE, so in the event that obviously they probably don't have PoE, you're going to want to supply them with the power adapter, the DC power adapter, 12 volts, or you could give them an ejector. Or you could, in the case of the power line adapter, go from the power line adapter into a small PoE switch, which would solve that problem too. Small 4-port PoE switches, especially dumb ones, are really affordable these days. Okay, let's get authenticated and see what that looks like. Okay, so this is my MacBook Pro, and I go up to the Wi-Fi chooser, and so you can see those 2 SSIDs that I was showing you in the Nebula. I click on the one that is the tunnel SSID, and then it pops up this authentication. Now, this is not your traditional WP2 type authentication. This is credentials to the Nebula cloud. So there's a difference here. These are unique just to me. All right, so click that, and then it'll come back around here in a minute, and I zoomed out a little bit for you here, and it's asking for the two-factor authentication. So I'm using Google Authenticator as the generator. So I put these in. So this is the part that I think is really, really cool, is because this would prevent any other person or device from getting on the network. So even if they had somehow sniffed my credentials, they still would need the two-factor authentication piece to complete joining this Wi-Fi SSID. And we go back to the Nebula, we can see the activity now. So there's that access point is online, and I can see that I've got, there's the SSID, and I can see there's the client connected to it, and some traffic going on. So this just gives you a little more visibility. You know, the goal here being to try to find better tools for IT to use to improve security in a world which has switched to a work from home paradigm.
All right, well, thanks for spending some time with me. I hope I helped you maybe think about corporate machines and home offices a little bit differently. I know for me, the more that I began to look at this, it made me realize that just simply having a VPN client, while it does provide some protection, it doesn't provide enough protection because the computer has to still be a member of the local area network. It still appear on the local area network. Whereas with the secure Wi-Fi, it's almost like there's literally a wire coming from the corporate firewall all the way into this office. Moreover, a lot of the things that I would do when I'm in the office, like printing, shared folders, any kind of premises-based type of network resources that I was used to using would still be available to me as though I were sitting right in the office. So anyway, I think the biggest thing that for me that really struck me was that, you know, when I'm in a home environment, IT doesn't know what's going on. IT isn't responsible for managing the other mobile devices, other computing devices that's in that household, not to mention things like outlet controllers and Google Assistants and my, what's the other thing I have? The Blink cameras. I mean, I don't know that stuff couldn't become compromised. And if it did, how would I even know? But by creating the secure Wi-Fi, at least I'm not sharing the network with those devices. All right, so I think I kind of beat that to death, but I hope you get what I'm saying. Anyway, thanks for spending time with me, and we'll see you next time.